All right, guys, let's have a little bit of fun before we head into the weekend. The clip I'm about to show you guys is a clip that I saw last week. It was from an episode of First Take. It's Stephen A, it's Jay Williams, it's Mad Dog Russo, and they have an interesting kind of debate conversation on where Shaq ranks all time. We're gonna play the clip, and then we'll kind of discuss the merits of it and kind of where they were right, where they were wrong.
Now do this. Shaq
What?
is what? The fifth best center in the history of the NBA?
What?
Fifth. Fifth.
What? What?
Shaq. What do you mean what?
Who's the four ahead of Shaquille O'Neal?
Would
Have
like
you
me to name-
lost
would
your
you want me to
damn
name 'em
mind?
for you?
What?
You want me to
Sure,
name
sure.
'em?
Go ahead. Go ahead.
Kareem.
Okay.
Wilt.
No.
I'm
Oh
not giving
my
it to
God,
Will.
No, you guys are crazy.
No.
I'm not giving it to Will.
No.
You're not
I'm
going to
not.
put Wilt Chamberlain, who averaged 50 points a game and scored
Who
100
was
a
a
game and
foot
30
taller? Who was a
You're
foot
nuts.
taller
You're
than
nuts.
99% of the league?
Oh,
Yeah.
The
you're
most
nuts.
dominant player in NBA history. Who was stopping Shaquille O'Neal
And
in
who-
any era?
And who's Tim
Who?
Duncan is better than
In-
he is.
in-
Tim Duncan's better.
But-
And
Well,
I tell you something, two other guys.
That's not a center. Tim Duncan's
Elijah Wan is better. Who beat him four
two-time
straight games.
champion of Shaq's 4.
Shaq's
no
4.
scoring titles to Shaq's 2. What are you talking about?
And I tell you
on,
somebody
man.
else who's better. You can laugh all you want.
I love Hakeem, but he won Shaq.
Oh, he's a better player than Shaq. Oh God, he's better. He killed. First off, he played
Wait,
Shaq and
no,
he beat
no.
him four straight games.
Define me better player. Tell me what better player means to you, doggy. I'm waiting for the definition, please.
Okay, first off, who did Shaq beat in the NBA final in the pivot?
It's not about who you beat.
Well, yes, it is. He beat Jason Collins, Rick Smits, and who was Philly's center?
Dikembe
And I tell you right
Mutombo.
now,
Dikembe
not better than-
Mutombo.
he's not better than Moses Malone.
What?
There's no chance. Don't give me that
Oh, my
twice.
Lord, why are you
No
allowed
way.
to talk basketball? Why?
He-
I love Moses Malone. Elite
You think
rebounder.
Shaq? You think Shaq?
Moses Malone was not Shaq.
Not a chance.
He was great, but he wasn't Shaq.
Help, Lord.
Malone led the league in rebounding six
So what?
consecutive years.
For help.
So what?
He won two
So
MVPs.
did
He
Rodman.
averaged. Oh, you're nuts.
Shaq.
Here's a question for you. What
Oh,
did
my
Malone
Lord.
do with a bunch of cast-offs against Bird, Parrish, and McHale in the 81 finals? I looked it up today. 31 and a half and 17 rebounds.
Nobody is saying Moses Malone
in their
is a
history.
Hall of
36
Famer.
and 15.
Moses
Against
Malone is a
Jason
Hall of
Collins.
In
Famer.
all the NBA finals, 37 to 15.
Jay, did he play a great center in the NBA finals?
But now you're gonna use it against him
Yes,
because of who
because
he's
he
playing
was so
against.
superior
It
to
doesn't
them.
matter who he would play
Yes,
against.
it does.
Are you kidding
Yes,
me?
it does. I'll give it.
All right, so that's the basically part of the clip there. They had a whole segment. Not necessarily reacting to the debate. I kind of just wanted to give my opinion on kind of the Shaq argument here because I mean, it depends what you mean of like when we're having these all-time great discussions where guys rank. Are you ranking like, hey, where would you have these guys like just for the peak of their peak? Is it something like that? Are you looking at the whole grand scope of a career? Are we playing the game of like, hey, we're picking like our top 5 starting 5 and like who would you want your center to be? So there's a lot of different realms of which you can talk about this stuff with, and I think that's where kind of a lot of like wires can get crossed, and I think that's where we have a lot of confusion, a lot of like, and a lot of fascination too with this debate. So before I like get into the actual kind of like substance of this debate here, I just wanted to preface my comments because I'm probably not going to be the most kind to Shaq here. I'm going to preface my comments though with Shaq saying that probably until he like retired, Shaq was probably, I was a kid that was born in the mid 90s. Shaq was probably one of my 2 or 3 favorite players of all time just growing up as a kid. I remember in like 04 when he went to Miami, there was a debate whether it's kind of like, all right, whose side are you taking? Taking Kobe's side? You taking Shaq's side? I took Shaq's side. I love Shaq. I still love Shaq. I love listening to him on TV. I don't listen to his podcast anymore, but there was a stretch where I did listen to his podcast for like probably over a year straight. It was a fun listen. Then he kind of like wouldn't be on it sometimes. They had some really fun givens on that show. I'm not even sure who's on it now, but it was a fun show. Check it out if you want to. Like Shaq's been on Comedy Central roasts. Like he is an incredibly likable figure in, just not even just the sports world, but just the pop culture world itself. With that being said, I think because of his likability, because he's on TV, because we hear him talk about his experiences, because they had the last three-peat in NBA history, because Shaq was the leader of that team. He was the guy that won all the finals MVPs. You watch the highlights of Shaq and you can kind of like just look at like from the highlight film and you're like, oh my God, look at how big and strong and powerful he was. Like the fact that like he was won those three straight titles, that was so dominant. It was incredible. No one could stop him, and no one could stop him in any era. And I think because of that stuff, and because Shaq's super likable, I think we kind of misremember, if I can talk, we misremember his career a little bit. And we misremember the flaws of Shaq's career. And there's one or two very fatal flaws that hold him back kind of in this debate here where you're talking about all-time greats. And now with that being said, Shaq is an all-time great. He's probably one of the 10 or 15 greatest players ever, however you want to rank them. Any metric you want to do, Shaq's in that 10, 12, 15 range. With that being said, here's Shaq's fatal flaws. Shaq could not hit free throws. He was like a career 51% or something like that. I should have looked that up before I had it, but he was around 50% for his career. I think the lowest he had in like a season was like 44. It was one of those Miami years. It was really, really bad. And, because of that free throw, just lack of the inability to hit free throws in a lot of ways hurt his teams. And there was like times in those Lakers playoffs runs, in those Miami playoff runs too, where he would have to be taken out of games late because he couldn't hit free throws. Like that's why Hack-a-Shaq was such a thing. An interesting stat is, here, I'll look it up. I wrote it down. I remember the free throw percentage, but I want to get the other numbers right. This is like a perfect encapsulation, I think, of Shaq's career. Okay. So this is the 2000 finals. So it was the first year that Shaq and Kobe won the finals. Shaq had 38 points in that finals. He averaged 17 rebounds, and he shot 38% from the free throw line. 38% from the free throw line. Now, when we talk about the reason I'm bringing that stuff up is Shaq was still dominant. He was still the best center of his era. And the fact that he couldn't hit free throws is like kind of when you get into the debate when you're talking about like top 3, top 4, top 5 all time. And it's like, if you are having that debate of like, hey, like pick your all-time starting 5. And a lot of people put Shaq in that. And I'm like, well, if you have Shaq in that, if we're having a 12-man roster, let's say, and we're counting fouls in this hypothetical game, we're doing Hack-a-Shaq every single time down the floor because he's going to either hit 1 or he's going to hit 0. And, if he hits 2, you just kind of shake his hand and say, good job, big man. But that's another thing that's just like seriously, go back and look it up. Like, they would have to take him out of playoff games late. And that could detrimentally hurt a team when you run your offense for this guy and you have to take him out late in games. That's kind of why the Shaq and Kobe pairing to a degree was like this like perfect element, because even if you did have to take Shaq out late and you couldn't necessarily rely on him to get you consistent fourth quarter offense because the defense would just foul him all the time and do Hack-a-Shaq, you'd have Kobe there who could be kind of like the closer. Now, as far as okay, I'll say one other flaw with Shaq, and then I'll kind of compare him to Moses and Hakeem. Another thing with Shaq here too is like this dude was perpetually out of shape. He wasn't out of shape to the point where it's like it like with Zion Williamson right now, where like it's detrimentally hurting Zion's career and his potential of like having a Hall of Fame career. Like Shaq was able to have a Hall of Fame career with being out of shape, but like that was a big beef between him and Kobe. And people want to like forget now, like, and Shaq and Kobe did kind of all sweep all this stuff under the rug with their beef. And it's like, it seems like they resolved it, it seems like they were at peace. They were friends, till the day Kobe passed. But that stuff got nasty. And there was a big thing with Kobe where Kobe would always call Shaq fat. And Kobe took his work very, very seriously, is that Mamba mentality that he had. And Shaq would just always kind of like come into the season and he'd play himself into shape. And there was like some years where it's like he's a big dude. There's some years where he was close to like 400 pounds. Like that's how big he got. Um, so that's another kind of flaw with Shaq here when we're talking about his resume, because yes, he was so dominant. Yes, he had all of these accomplishments, all of these achievements. He scored all of those points. Um, but and Kobe Bryant had a clip saying this at one point in like the 2010s. I can't remember if it was when he was playing or if it was after he retired, but it was on a late night show. And someone asked him, it's like, well, if they took your mentality and they put it in Shaq's body, what would happen? Kobe was like the greatest player ever. And like Kobe Bryant was probably right, because Shaq, a lot of times he's more concerned with having fun off the court, partying, making movies, making a rap album, doing business adventures. And because of that, like, I think that Shaq wasn't as focused on basketball all the time as, some other players were. With that being said, too, now if we're going to compare him, because here's kind of how I would have the ranks. Now, I'm not the biggest person with putting together lists for this stuff, but I think if you're going to do it, this is how you have to do it. You would do the greatest center of all time is Kareem. He's got the points, he's got the MVPs, he's got the titles, he's number one. And then I think 2, 3, you have to have Bill Russell, Wilt Chamberlain. Even though they played in a different era, just the amount of dominance that they had together. Because Wilt was so dominant, and then like Bill Russell would just like beat him in the playoffs every year. So Bill Russell, the fact that he didn't have the numbers necessarily that Wilt did, like Bill Russell had 11 titles. He had like 5 MVPs. Wilt Chamberlain had 2 titles, 5 MVPs. And then the thing is, like with Wilt, it's like, well, what if Bill Russell would have never happened? What if Bill Russell just never existed? Would Wilt Chamberlain have like 13 titles? Would he have like 8? Would he have 9? Would he have something like that? So in a way too, I think you have to like respect that stuff. Now, if you're going to do the thing where it's like, well, if you put everybody in like today's game, who would translate the best? It's like, yeah, maybe Wilt and Bill Russell wouldn't have translated because they played 60 years ago. But I still think we have to respect the legends. And if you're talking about just like resume, career accomplishments, I think you have to have Bill Russell 2, Chamberlain 3. And then you get into this 4, 5, 6 range here with Hakeem, Shaq, and Moses. And this is where it actually is kind of close. So you have to kind of look at a lot of different variables here with this stuff. Again, so let's kind of go over the Moses thing, because Moses, I think Shaq's better than Moses, but I just kind of want to defend Moses' resume here a little bit. Moses won 3 league MVPs. I don't know if people know that, because I didn't know that until I looked it up. Moses, he was the greatest rebounder in NBA history. And doing that, he was just so dominant. He won 3 MVPs. He was the best player on 1 title team. His career kind of got like off to like a weird start because he started off in the ABA, and then he was kind of floating around the ABA for a few years, and then the leagues merge, and then he goes off and joins the Rockets. He's there with the Rockets for a few years. He carries this terrible Rockets team to the finals. Then the Rockets really, can't afford to keep him. So then Philly ends up snatching him up, and then him and Dr. J. So like another cool thing with like Moses too, he won an MVP. He won back-to-back MVPs. He won 1 with Houston. Then the next year he went to Philly, won the MVP again, and won the title. But he did only have 1 title. He did have only 4 first-team All-NBAs. So even though his numbers were incredible, also too, if you are doing the thing where it's like, hey, these guys can't play in this era, Moses had no sort of like post moves. Like it was literally just rebounds. Like teammates, you can read quotes of them where they were just like, yeah, I would just take a bad shot and shoot it because I knew Moses would be there to tip it in. So that's just kind of a few things about Moses. I'd have Shaq over Moses, though, but I just kind of wanted to go over his career there a little bit. Now, the Hakeem Shaq thing does get a little interesting because Hakeem did beat Shaq head to head. Now, you could say that's young Shaq. If you had 2000 Shaq versus 95 Hakeem, would that be a different story? Hakeem, 6 first-team All-NBAs, 1 MVP, 2-time champ, 2-time Finals MVP. And if we're doing the Hakeem Shaq thing here, and then this is probably going to be the last negative thing I say about Shaq. I'm already going longer in this than I wanted to. The thing about Shaq, and now you could say this is a positive for Shaq, and that's why he was so dominant over everyone else. You could also say this was a detriment to Shaq because he wasn't pushed hard enough in his career. When Shaq fully got into his prime, that late 90s and that like early to mid 2000s range, kind of like that 98 to like, let's say 06 range, who was the second best center in the league at that time? Can you give me a guess? Like who do you think were the guys that were making second team All NBAs, third team All NBAs in that range? I'll give you some names. We had David Robinson, who was more towards the end of his career than the beginning of his career. Alonzo Mourning, I think he had 1 second team All NBA one of those years. Dikembe Mutombo, who was a one-trick pony, excellent defender, but that's all he could do was play defense. Ben Wallace made multiple second team All NBAs. Ben Wallace, single season, his entire career, I think he made 4 All NBA teams. Shout out to Ben Wallace. He is a Hall of Famer. Show respect. NBA champion. But Ben Wallace never averaged more than 10 points in a season. His entire career. Never averaged more than 10 points. These were the guys that were making All NBA teams in the 2000s. A few other names. Yao Ming. Yao Ming was he had like a 4 or 5 year run there. His career got derailed due to injuries. Amari Stoudemire that's kind of weird. He was a center for a few years. He also was a power forward for a lot of his career. Just kind of going through the All NBAs. He was voted as a center for that to a few times. And then if you're going to like the Hakeem peaks, let's just stick with Hakeem here. I can talk about the Moses Malone peaks here in a minute. If you're going like the peaks of their career, like when they're like making first, second team All NBAs year after year, here is who Hakeem had to compete for first team All NBAs with. Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. Now that didn't last that long. It was kind of like when Hakeem got in the league and Kareem was still in his prime in the mid 80s. Moses Malone, because Moses was still pretty good in the mid 80s. Patrick Ewing, top 50 player all time, top 40 player all time, wherever you want to have him. David Robinson, top 30, 40 player all time. And again, he had the early David Robinson years, not the late David Robinson years. But okay, just a little bit of heads up here. My dog jumped on me while I was making that last point there, so that's why the video is just kind of weird right now. But getting back to that point that I was saying in that video, I think Mad Dog was actually making the right point and the correct point, but I think he was doing it the wrong way. The way he should have framed it was like, "Hey, Shaq, yeah, you're right. He was incredibly dominant in his era, but he also didn't have like how Bill Russell had a Wilt Chamberlain. He didn't have his Wilt Chamberlain. How Hakeem in the 80s and 90s, he had Ewing, he had Robinson, Kareem for a little bit. Like Shaq didn't have that. Moses Malone had Kareem, he had Bill Walton, Bob McAdoo, as we were mentioning. Who else did I have written down there? Cowens. Like he had all these kind of Artis Gilmore had like a cup of coffee and maybe the best center debate there. Like Shaq really didn't have that. He had Ben Wallace, who was like 6'8", not scoring 10 points, and that's the guy that was making 4 All NBA teams when Shaq was at the peak of his powers. A last point here, if you're going to do the Hakeem over Shaq thing. Hakeem, his entire career, only played with 4 All-Stars. The 4 All-Stars were Ralph Sampson at the beginning of his career, who Ralph Sampson, because he was like 7'6" or whatever, his career was cut short due to injuries. He had Otis Thorpe, who, if you don't know who Otis Thorpe is, that's okay. I don't either. He had Clyde Drexler, but that was Clyde. Clyde made the All-Star team like after it was Clyde was towards the end of his prime rather than beginning of his prime. And then he had Houston Barkley. Those were the only 4 players that Hakeem had on his team his entire career that were all-stars. During that like late 80s to early 90s stretch before they got good in the mid 90s, that team was hot garbage surrounding Hakeem. Like that team was hot garbage. It was terrible. It was gross. Um, and you kind of like you could do the argument too if you really want to do this debate, the Shaq Hakeem debate. You could be like, well, what if from 88 to now Shaq and Kobe did play 8 years. What if from 88 to 96 uh Hakeem had like young Kobe for 8 years? Like how many finals would he won? Could that have been a good enough nucleus to beat like a Jordan Bulls team? So that's just kind of like the last few points I wanted to have in this debate here, just kind of to put a bow on it. A lot of interesting points there. It's not crazy if you have Shaq fifth as your all-time center. That's basically my point here. And there are a lot of flaws in Shaq's career. Again, to just say it again, because when I did the Deion Sanders video last week, everyone came out and said I was a Deion hater. I love Shaq. Shaq is one of my favorite players of all time, but he didn't have this flawless career, and there were holes in his game and at times how he approached the game. So that's going to do it for the episode today. Sorry I had that little editing mix up here with these last 3 minutes. It probably kind of seems out of place. Hopefully I can kind of edit it and make it seem normal. If you like this video, please hit that subscribe button. I've been doing this podcast now for 4 years. I'm just now starting to put clips like this and interviews on YouTube. I'm not doing any interviews probably until maybe next week or maybe the week after. Didn't want to really ask anyone to come on do interviews during the holidays. I've done over 50 plus interviews. I talk NFL, college football, NBA, obviously, college basketball. I've done over 50 plus interviews, people all over the country covering different sports, former athletes. So if you like stuff like that, hit subscribe, hit that like button. And if you want to go back and listen to previous episodes, explore the channel, or you could even listen to the audio version of the episode. Just search Sports Detective Podcast wherever you get your podcast. Thank you for watching this video. I really appreciate it. You guys have a nice weekend and, have fun going into 2024. Set some New Year's resolutions.